Welcome back to Wednesday Night Live. I'm your host, Ralph Lillig. I'm so glad you're here. As we do every week at this time, let me remind you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center, 478-HOPE. Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center, their mission statement says, is a Christ-centered nonprofit ministry offering life-affirming alternatives to abortion and compassionate care to those who face pregnancy and abortion-related issues. It's that simple. They are not like the House of Horrors, also known as Planned Parenthood. These folks are pro-life. Their whole job is to help a young mother or an expectant mother bring the child into this world. Oftentimes these are young people who need counseling. Maybe they weren't expecting this and they need some help. But Compassion and Hope needs your help. So won't you please call them and see what you can do to help them at 208-478-HOPE. God will bless you. You'll bless somebody else, and everyone will profit. God bless you for your thoughts on this. Thank you. We're very pleased to have a return engagement, if you will, with our friend, someone we didn't know just about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and we have become friends since then, Barbara Orr. Barbara Orr is running for City Council seat number 3. And Barbara, thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me.
We're just delighted. We had hoped to get Barbara in. This will be the last videoing, I guess, that we're going to be doing before the election, Tuesday, November 3rd. Tuesday, isn't it?
It is Tuesday, yeah. Yep.
Which is just right around the corner. Can you believe November's already here, and now it's November 3rd for the election? And please, please, exercise your one thing that the government hasn't taken from you yet, your right to vote. And of course, I can endorse Barbara because I no longer affiliate with the local Republican Party at their request. They don't like the likes of me in their party. So I can now endorse people that I might not have been able to do before. Barbara is a breath of fresh air, and I do hope that you will take the time to look at her statement. You can get that online, and look at what she is hoping to do. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then later when Barbara is moving back into the real world, we're going to talk about the candidates in general. So in the meantime, well, Barbara, kind of bring me up to date on what's happening with your campaign.
Well, we've really had a lot of fun. We've had several debates. We were in the parade. We gave out 1,500 flyers in the parade, 50 pounds of candy. That was really fun. And we have been putting signs all over town. My signs are the ones with a smiley face.
Yes, yeah, you can't miss them.
And we've just been having a lot of fun and talking to a lot of people, getting a feel for the community and things that concern people. And one of the things, as you know, that's concerned people has been the property tax, because it's gone from 16 million to 26 million in the past 10 years. That's a 68% increase, and it's really quite a hardship.
Gee, $1 million a year doesn't seem like a lot of money.
Not to those who are not paying it.
That's right, to those who are not paying it.
That's
correct.
Right.
By the way, just a reminder, now Barbara Orr is not related to Michael Orr, and Michael Orr is a fiscal conservative, and I think we need to have both oars in the water, as I said before, so one more reason to remember the Orr. There is no connection there, but she will bring some fiscal conservatism to the City Council that I think you and I will both find quite refreshing, especially in light of this one little revelation. In 10 years, it's gone up $10 million. What's wrong with this picture? How did we get there?
Well, we got there because we're focusing on the wrong things.
Yeah.
You know, we've been building parks, we've been building all kinds of infrastructure that would really suit a city of 200,000 people.
This is one of the things I've spoken on this before, and I know there are people, especially in the universities, that despise me because of this point of view, but I have to say, we are still a small town, and even though we're not the smallest in the state, we are a small town, 53,000, 50,000, whatever it is, and then our sister city next door, another 10, 11,000. That is not really very big, and we really can't live like the big guys financially. We can't spend the kind of money they do to try to keep up with the Joneses.
That's right.
Or in this case, to try to keep up with the Boise's. You know, the Boise has what I'm told is a wonderful greenway. Well, we don't have not only do we not have the resources to do that, but we don't have the wherewithal where to put it without infringing other people's lives, taking their property and causing all kinds of headaches. And why? So that we can say we've got one just like the big guys? How silly is that?
Well, and the biggest problem that we have is all those things take land off the property tax base.
Yes.
So there's not property tax being paid on them. The Parks Department actually maintains 360 acres. That's how much they maintain.
That is basically a half-mile square, half section.
Okay. And then we own another 100 acres that are not maintained, that would be brush and, whatever. But that's way too much land for a city this small to own. And the thing that we want to see happen is we just want a way more realistic approach to what we're doing. Right now the city has 514 employees full-time, 35 part-time employees, and we use a couple hundred seasonal temporaries, when we're weeding the 360 acres.
Yeah.
128 of these people should be being paid by the water department, and it should be separated out. One of the problems that we have had for a long, long time is that the water department is not separate, and so the water fees that you're being charged also pay other things, and they actually should not. 386 of our employees should be being paid by property tax. And so we have to look at everything more realistically. One of the things that we also have in the city that really hasn't been addressed for a long time is, how the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
So they say.
Yes. Well, a lot of times when you have a city, you have departments that kind of vie for attention, and depending on how much public support they might be able to get, for puppies or for zoos or for parks, instead of having the finances based on sound principles for city infrastructure, a lot of times they'll be based on what's popular.
Yes.
So that's a real problem that the city has, because a lot of the salaries and a lot of the situations in the different departments are really out of whack for what that particular department serves. They need to be weighted on the basis of what's in the best interest and absolutely necessary for the citizens. And that's really never been done because, again, things evolve. They evolve over time. It's really no one's fault. It just evolves. It happens. But after it happens, we really need to look at where we're at, because for the last 30 years, our mayors and our city councils and our managers of the city have been agreeing together on how to spend our money.
Yeah.
And we really need to kind of stop that.
Now, those of you who watch this program regularly, and those of you who know about my political activities, know that many times I've been very critical of the way the city management operates, and I haven't changed my opinion on that. I'm still thinking that we have a management crisis. And the city council's job really, among other things, in my opinion, they're not just there to be a rubber stamp for the mayor and his programs. They're not there to rubber stamp each other's programs. They are there to protect the citizens, the taxpayers' interest. And quite honestly, I don't think they do, because they don't like to ask the hard questions. They don't like to ask the questions that somebody might say, well, that's a sacred cow, we can't touch that, especially if it's the guy at the other end of the city council bench. If it's his sacred cow, well, then they're going to go off. One of the things that has puzzled me for an awful long time is, and I'm not going to make any friends by this, I know, but I'm going to ask this anyway. Why do we give money to the various charitable organizations such as Aid for Friends? Now, I have nothing against Aid for Friends, but why is the city giving money to that? If we're going to have charities, then it should be that exactly. It should be a charity, not funded out of local resources. That should be coming from people who are interested in that particular charity. But somehow, every year, you can see the people from, and not just Aid for Friends. I mean, there are many, you'll see them standing up asking for money, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of money. Sometimes it's $200 or $300 or $400. My point is, though, why are we spending that at all? This city we're in dire financial straits, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. And that brings me back to Barbara, because Barbara, as she's been going around talking to people, has been asking some of the questions that I've wondered, why don't we ever hear the city council, the current members, asking these very questions?
Well, and a lot of it, too, is that the city council members and the mayor, when they're entrenched in their situation, where they're dealing with Robert's Rules of Order and they're dealing with what is presented to them, they are not always in a position to get the right information because they are getting the information that's being given to them by a department head who has a vested interest. You know, and you can't blame the department head. You would do the same thing if you were in his or her position.
Sure, you want to keep
right?
your job.
You want to keep things going.
Yeah.
You want to make sure your department grows. So a lot of times they get information from people. And the other thing that's there is that sometimes they don't recognize the red flags. They're a volunteer group and they don't recognize the red flags when they see them in finances or they see them in these reports that are handed to them. And I'll just give you an example. This is a big red flag to me that I ran across as I was going through the budget, and you'll see this online. This is information that's the service summary. In 2014, we had 172 workmen's compensation claims in the city of Pocatello. Now, we have 514 employees. That's 34% of the people got hurt or injured on the job. This has got to be the most dangerous workplace in the entire city. I am really concerned about this particular number.
If you're looking for a job, don't come here.
No,
it's too dangerous.
That's right. And in this year, there's been, in 2015, there has been 175. Now, somehow, we are not taking care of some issues, some safety issues. Of those, only 9 claims resulted in time lost from work. The other claims were just claims. I also find that rather puzzling. And you can find all of these things on online, but 175 workmen's compensation claims when you've got 500 people working, and we could even add the 35 part-time and the 200 seasonal to that. 175 claims is still way too many. You know, we may be counting every paper cut. I don't know, but I'd like to look into it and find out. That's a number that really gives me a red flag. And I think there are other areas where I could be very helpful to other members of the council. And the other thing that you have to remember too about the mayor and the council, and I'm retired, so I can do this full time. I can get in there and look at things. The mayor spends a lot of time in ribbon cutting things. People request his time to go visit, you know, and to go present himself at every avenue and every opening. Well, he's the CEO of the city. It is really important that he has the time to function as CEO. So you need to kind of keep that in mind with the mayor's time. And then the city council members, most of them work full-time. So when you have city council members that are in there part-time, so I highly recommend you elect people that are retired or people that you know have enough time to do this particular job, because it's essentially a volunteer job.
You know, it's an interesting thing, Barbara. You just triggered several thoughts here, but the one that, let me back up to the mayor. Years ago, when I lived in Los Angeles, we had a mayor whose name was Sam Yorty. Sam Yorty was a good mayor, actually. He was a Democrat. He was an old-fashioned liberal. In other words, he was honest, and he was a good mayor, but he traveled a lot. And we used to refer to him, and it was universal. He was known as Suitcase Sam because he was always coming or going to somewhere. However, he did know how to administer his job as the mayor. He knew who to delegate to. He knew how to get answers and check up on who was delegated. He was a pretty good mayor. Now, it's a fine thing, the mayor being the CEO, the head poobah, the however you want to look at it, the figurehead. It's a fine thing to be liked, but you can't always be liked. Sometimes you have to work. Now, I don't say that this mayor's not working. What I'm saying is maybe he's not getting enough time in the trench, in his own trenches, to take care of the administrative functions, and maybe he's relying too much on others to do it and not holding them accountable. And that takes us back to the workman's comp thing. When I was a sergeant with LAPD, one of my jobs was to do follow-ups when an officer called in sick or injured, and you did it for just about every time. Anytime they called in and said, I'm sick, on the third day, if they were still sick, they were required to bring a doctor's slip showing it. And if they were in certain circumstances, we would pay a house call. That was one of my jobs as a sergeant, to go out and knock on their door. Say, Fred, what's going on, buddy? What can I do to help you? Are you really sick, or are you just having having some moments here? And then there was follow-up on that. Now, I don't say that that's not happening, but what I have to wonder, and I know you were being trying to put a little humor in here, but there is a certain truth to that. If out of 172, was it, there are only 9 that resulted in time off, does that mean that we've got too many administrative paper cuts and staple holes in our? I mean, there's something very wrong with this. Does every single thing that happens result in a workman's comp claim? Workman's comp claims are very expensive. In this city, we're self-insured.
Right.
That's a big chunk of money.
It is.
Does this mean that somewhere it's not filtering down from the top, that there are people held responsible to find out if these are legitimate claims?
Right, or what's going on. Because if this were the state, if they were insured through the state, they would no way have this number of claims, because the state insurance fund would really raise their premiums if they had this kind of claim. The other thing is, we have some jobs that are really quite dangerous. We have the police, who, occasionally get shot at, and we've got the fire department. People get burned, in the fire department. So we have some areas, the guys that pick up the trash and the street department, some of the people that work up in the water department and so on. There's some areas that can be quite dangerous, and so you can appreciate that. But those are the people that we want workman's comp for, and we want it to be really solid, and we want to make sure that the people that actually lose time for an accident are being taken care of with this. And with 175 claims, it's something that if you elect me, I will go find out exactly who was paid and why we have so many, because we may need some real safety training in the city of Pocatello. And if this is our seasonal employees, we need to really spend time safety training. When they put down the time lost, they're only counting full-time employees on the time lost that they paid. I want to see if they paid the part-time employees as well, or the seasonal employees, because they didn't track it. And this is just one of those areas where, you have to be careful sometimes who you hire. With things like this, you have to be careful of these things. And this is something that our Human Resources Department really needs to be careful with.
I would be very interested in seeing those isolated to see where those injuries were. And having been a policeman, of course, I understand that. Having worked with firefighters, I certainly understand that. And some of these others. But I would be interested to see where the problem lies. Or is it just evenly spread? And I'd like to know that. But nonetheless, and we need workman's compensation. Please don't misunderstand either Ms. Orr or myself. We're not saying that we don't need this, that it's a bad idea. But there are things that somebody has to be watching the chicken coop. And it makes you wonder, as a citizen, neither of us are privy to what's going on in the various offices. So as a citizen,
it just raises a flag.
It raises a flag. And there should be. And this is one of the reasons why you've heard me say this several times. I don't mean to beat it to death, but I'm going to say it again. I find Barbara to be a breath of fresh air, because she's not afraid to look at things that some people might say, oh, I don't want to touch that. People on the city council today, I bet you 2 to 1, they don't want to touch some of these things because, well, we're going to go into the different council members, and then we can talk about, not Barbara and I will later on, and I can perhaps identify why some people on the city council don't want to go to these areas. What else, Barbara? What else? I know you've been busy.
Yeah, I've been very interested in just going through and seeing what I saw just on some of the things that I've seen just on the surface are things that I hope that I'll have an opportunity to address, because we really don't want to continue down the road that the city's been going on for the last 30 years. We can't continue spending money we don't have on things that we don't need. And one thing I really want to see the city do is not build anything else unless there is an absolute need for it.
Yes.
Because we have built a lot of things in this city. There was no press of people. There was no demand for it. There was no real need for it. And so, you know, we've got these wonderful facilities, but I am interested in seeing the city stabilize its budget and then really look at each area, department by department, see exactly what we're doing, see where we need to be able to take care of the planning and zoning situation. We've got to have a business-friendly community if we expect to grow. And that'll be my first priority, is to get that area looked at and taken care of. We have 10 persons now in the planning and zoning department. I believe about 4 years ago they were actually under the engineering department, but this is another area that's kind of grown and blossomed, you know, again, the squeaky wheel. Mm-hmm. So you've got 10 people regulating what businesses do in this community, and that's very unhealthy. When we have planning and zoning people, they are planning land they don't own with money that's not theirs. You always have to remember that about paid city employees that are in planning and zoning. We all would love a utopia, right? We would all love this spectacular city, this magnificent thing, right? But the local market can only support just so much. And that's what people have to realize. Everything that is planned for this city has got to be cost feasible for the persons, for the citizens. It's got to be cost feasible for the businesses. And we've had kind of these illusions of grandeur since I've lived here, and I think we really need to give up on them.
You know, and this is, here again, this, by questioning, these are not casting aspersions on any. One of the things I learned many years ago, I tried to share it with our current mayor, and he didn't seem too interested. Bureaucracies take care of themselves. Council people come and go, mayors come and go, but the bureaucracy remains, and it takes care of itself. And unless somebody's paying attention to who's taking care of what, you have, there is a tendency for good people, people that aren't necessarily looking to do evil, to protect their turf, to protect their bureaucracy. One of the things that that can help to dissuade a little bit of protection, perhaps, is a zero bottom. What's the proper thing? Budgeting, where you start at zero. You don't start at what your last budget is. You start at zero, and you quantify, qualify, and provide information that shows why you need this money. Bureaucracies tend to overlap sometimes, and you'll find two entities doing the same job. And here again, if somebody's not watching the shop, and this is why, going back to Barbara has not been afraid to ask the questions she has, to go online and find things that are accessible to all of us. And many of these things, I'm embarrassed for the city council that we have. Many of them, they've not asked those questions. I would like to see somebody get on that city council, Barbara Orr, for instance, who is willing to stand up and say, look, this is a problem, let's address it.
Well, one of the things you have to remember, too, about bureaucracy, I used to do political things years ago, and one of the things that we did, I was part of a group called Citizens for Financial Stability. It was a group of accountants. And we managed to get the state of Idaho to rescind every tax that cost more to collect than it was worth.
Excellent.
We got them to set aside a rainy day fund for the state of Idaho, because previously, when things got tough, they'd lay off all the college professors, give them 4-day work weeks, which was really hard on them, and hard on the students too. So we did some things like that. Well, one of the reasons that we did it was because we knew that if we could get them to do something reasonable, rational, and sensible, it would last for at least 25 years. Because that's what the best thing about bureaucracy is. If you get something that's stable and sensible, it's going to last a long, long time. And so that's the nature of bureaucracy, the nature of law. That's why you're doing it, is so that you have a stable society. The downside of that is if you get something in your bureaucracy that's wrong, yes, it will also last 25 years.
Yes.
So you really have to struggle to get rid of the things that are not right and then keep the things that are right.
And sometimes struggling means not doing the old go along to get along.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you have to buck the tide. Sometimes you have to stand up and take a little heat, take a little flack. Sometimes it can be shown that you were incorrect, and you have to be willing to humble yourself and you say, you know what, you were right. I haven't seen much humility on the city council. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen real humility on the city council.
Well, I think that's one of the problems the city has always had, in that, well, for example, when they were caught using the equipment,
yes,
on other cities. Okay, when we do something wrong, it is appropriate to repent. Yeah. It is appropriate to apologize. It is appropriate to go back and make it right. It's appropriate to go back and hold accountable whoever was really accountable for that. We never had any of that done. Well, this city, in the history of the time I've been here, 38 years, I have watched things go on in the city, this kind of thing, it comes to the public, people are protesting about it, but it never goes to full accountability. That's why there's no repentance. That's why there's no humility. The only way that that happens is if you actually hold people accountable when they have done something wrong, especially if they've committed a crime. You make sure that crime is public, and you make sure that they are prosecuted. You have to do that. You have to do that. It's not rocket science, any of this stuff.
It's not. And let me tag on to that. There's a very popular, I call it a cop-out, that we see this all the time. We've seen it recently with Hillary Clinton in her hearings, where she has beat up on the Republicans. She sure showed those guys. And that is public figures who will say, I take full responsibility. Well, now, have you ever thought, what does that mean? I take full responsibility. What does that actually mean? Well, responsibility means that there is a consequence to misdeed, to an misaction. If something is wrong, there is a consequence to the responsibility. And if you have done something wrong, you have to be answerable. And so we hear all the time, we hear politicians saying, well, I take full responsibility. Well, if there's no consequence, and if there's nobody suffers a punishment or whatever, at least a comeuppance, then who cares? I mean, what does it? Responsibility means nothing. It's like your teenager says, oh, I'm responsible. Oh yeah, okay, bend over, here's a SWAT. You know, we don't see that much with politicians. And so I think personal responsibility is something that the people have to be held accountable for.
Absolutely. Well, and people have to recognize too, if they're a mayor, or if they're a city council person, or if they're a governor, or if they're an elected representative, or if they're a president, or if they're a king. I mean, no matter who they are, if they have authority, they are held responsible for the people that authority affects. Yeah. And that is something that it seems like our elected representatives have forgotten. You know, the scriptures say, seek great things for yourself, seek them not. The reason it says seek them not is because you're going to be held accountable.
That's right. For
the decisions that you make that affect other people.
And what happens with the king when they are held responsible? They're deposed.
Absolutely.
The king,
that's what happens.
The head, what is it? The head that rules lays lightly, or whatever it is. I forget the proper term, but yeah, the king can be deposed. Well, it should be the same with city council, mayor, or any other public figure, somebody that we're counting on to represent us, right, to uphold our needs and all that. Running a city is not an easy thing. I understand that. And when I make some of the statements and remarks I don't do it as intended as a thumb in the eye. Sometimes I'm angry enough I want to stick a thumb in the eye, but I'm generally saying it hopefully to spark some kind of a response, a positive response that is going to improve things.
Right.
And we just don't see a whole lot of that in this bureaucracy.
Well, we don't see a lot of it in the country right now either. And I really call I call it moral immaturity is what we are suffering. We suffer it in this city. And let me give you a good example. A building is just a building. It doesn't matter if it's a church, it doesn't matter if it's a temple, it doesn't matter if it's a mosque. A building is a building. Get over it. Get over it, right? If somebody that is your neighbor wants to build a building and he has the means to build a building, let him build it and leave him alone. Realize it's just a building. An organization of any kind is just a group of people. All of these people are your friends, they are your neighbors, they are just people. Real threats are things that we should look at. Real dangers are things that we should look at. That's what we have police for, and they're great at it. They are great at it. They are really protecting our community. We have a very peaceful community. But all these other things are just subjective, and we have to stop caring about those things and just care about people. Don't let it not matter to you what their background is, what their religion is, who they are as far as how much wealth they have. For heaven's sake, they're all just people. Let's treat everybody in this community with respect. It's really time we did that, because a lot of the problems that we have had with business has been because of this moral immaturity. Because if you won't let your neighbor do business, you won't let your neighbor freely live his life, there's something wrong with you, not with your neighbor.
Well, that has been said, and it is true, that local government governs best. It's closest to the people. You don't get any closer to the people than you do with city council. And that's one more reason why not only do you have a responsibility as well as a right to vote. You vote for the person. This is why it's still a secret ballot. I had someone ask me during the last election cycle, who'd you vote for? And I said, it's none of your business. They didn't like that response, and perhaps it was a little short, but it is none of their business. That's why it's still a secret ballot. It's my business. Now, if I wish to share it on my own, that's fine. But we're talking here, as we're talking to Barbara, we're talking about the government closest to those who are governed. And if we can't count on our city council and our mayor to represent us, we're lost. We're in trouble. Now, it's human nature, I think, to have certain persuasions towards certain things, and there's no way in the world that the city council members aren't going to bring something of an agenda with them. In this case, her agenda appears to be that she'd like to see what the heck's going on. And I think that's a pretty darn good agenda.
It'll be fun.
What's under the carpet here? But we have other agendas, and in fact, when Barbara leaves the program here, I'm going to be talking about agendas and other things that are, well, difficult. Barbara, now we have, well, a week from tomorrow.
Yep.
And
please put it on your calendar. Put it on your day planner.
Absolutely.
Put it in your phone.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you can remember it.
With all the communications devices we have today, now I confess, I am so old world. Ballpoint pens are sophistication for me, and if you start clicking it, I get lost. So I have to write it down someplace.
They invented pencils the year I started in school.
Well, I can honestly
Lead
say,
pencils. My sister used an inkwell.
yes, I did
She's
too.
older.
In fact, those of you who are old enough, we had to be taught how to use an ink pen that we dipped in a well, and how to be careful not to press the nib too hard so it didn't spread and splay. And there were a lot of things. The ballpoint pen was quite an innovation.
That's right. Can you imagine being in a classroom of 30 6-year-olds who all have ink and pens?
And I can remember going home many times with ink spots all over my hands because I wasn't paying attention to what the teacher was saying.
Yeah, pencils were great.
Well, Barbara, we've recently learned you have some people who have endorsed you that feel that you're the right person. You want to talk about, just mention who those are?
Well, I think they're going to be doing that publicly tomorrow, so I'm going to let them go ahead and do that. I've been very grateful for those who have endorsed me and who are supporting me. I just appreciate them very much.
Well, we certainly appreciate the fact that you're willing to put yourself forth. You know, if you've run for office, I can tell you, having run for office, and I didn't want to at the time, so I was bucking the tide. But having run for office, I can tell you, it is not an easy task. You have to do a lot of soul searching, make sure that you're on board with a good reason to be there. And
motive is really important.
Motive is very important. It is very important. There are some people that go into it with the wrong motives.
Yeah, don't ever go into political office of any kind if you're self-serving. Just don't go there. You're going to get hurt really badly. I mean, the one thing that was fun, I've run 30-some political campaigns for other people. The thing that was always so fascinating, if somebody had a character flaw, it would show up in the campaign.
It'll come out. Yeah.
It was all, you could always see it in the campaign, because running for office, you know, you're transparent.
Yeah, well,
when
we
you
hope
run
so.
for office.
Yeah, we find some that we wonder if they are, but yeah, hopefully you should be, and you should be. The idea is to be a public servant, and that term is an old-fashioned term, but it's nonetheless real. A public servant is just that, a servant to the public, and it is not something to take lightly. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for your time. Hey, this is always fun.
I wish you every luck. Don't forget to untie yourself when you leave there.
Thanks.
My wife and I are going to get down and do some early voting, so we'll probably see some people down there.
Well, we sure appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Well, give us just a moment here to rearrange the set, as it were, so we can get back into our usual setting. It's one of the things about mom and pop TV. We don't have a whole lot of room to move around. So, well, that was delightful, and I wish we had a little more time. I'm glad we were able to have Barbara back for a second time. I think she is the right person for the job. And we're going to compare, we're going to do a little comparison shopping, if you will, with some of the other people that are running for City Council. Some of them already there, some of them who have been there before. By the way, the Republican Liberty Caucus, if they can get the newspaper to print the announcement, and you never know with the Idaho State Journal, but the Republican Liberty Caucus is endorsing Barbara's candidacy for City Council. Now, you may not be familiar with the Republican Liberty Caucus. It is within the Republican Party, and let me just read you their mission statement so you understand if you don't already know who they are. This is a quote: "The mission of the Republican Liberty Caucus, RLC, is to return the Republican Party to its ideological roots of limited government, free enterprise, and personal responsibility and liberty." Personal liberty and responsibility. Pretty straightforward, pretty old-fashioned, but that's what they're all about. And they see in Barbara the kind of person that fits within those parameters. Well, I did a little research. I have to say my wife did a little research for me on people who are running for office, and I wanted to share a little bit with you. As I said before, the City Council and Mayor offices are the local level. That is as close to the local government or government as most of us are going to get. And so it's really important that we see who's running and what they're looking for. So bear with me just a minute. The only candidate, interestingly enough, that has so far, now I have to tell you again and remind you, even though you will see this on Wednesday night, I'm required to tape it on Mondays. So we're going to be a little bit behind, and I unfortunately won't be able to give you the results on the elections, but we will talk about it after that happens. But the only candidate at this point to send out any advertisement has been Jim Johnston, and we will talk about Jim Johnston in just a moment. And give me a moment to find my list of the people who were running and who bothered to. Not everybody bothered to answer the questions that were put forth. They're on the city's web page. And these are candidate questions that each candidate can or cannot. They don't have to, but they're simple questions. Basically, what do you want to do? Why are you running? So let's see. Well, let's start with seat number 1, Jim Johnston. Why are you interested in running for office for the city of Pocatello? Bear with me because I need to read this to make comments. He said, "We have a great city. We can be better by working cooperatively to improve the quality of life for all of our citizens." Now, I urge you, as I'm reading this, think about each sentence and what does it mean. Always ask. One of the things that I learned when I was learning about law enforcement, first thing, and attorneys learn the same thing: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are the questions that every investigation requires. Some of them you don't have to mess with, but you start off with who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I would ask you to apply those questions to the statement of this candidate. We are making progress, and I would like to continue to make Pocatello all that it is capable of becoming by having jobs that pay a livable wage, housing that is affordable, and education opportunities for everyone. We must cooperate with Chubbuck, Bannock County, and Idaho State University and the business community to use all of our resources to strengthen our economy. Blah, 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 blah. These are, I mean, this is boilerplate. There's nothing new here. There's nothing innovative here. It's simply a statement of things, shared values, if you will. We all feel this way. We want our community to succeed. We want to see our community grow and have some purpose for being here. I don't see that in Jim Johnston's statement. In fact, I must say that I've been reviewing the time that Jim has been. Now, Jim was originally appointed to his position, I believe, by Mayor Bladd, and then he was elected later to that. Once you're in a position as an elected person, it's pretty hard to get you out if you give even the slightest push to stay there. And if you don't ever cause any waves, if you don't ever say anything, if you don't dig, you're going to be there forever possibly, because you don't make waves, you don't rock the boat. Jim is a non-rocker. He's a nice guy. I know Jim personally. I've known him for about 10 years roughly. He's a nice guy, one of the greatest cheerleaders for the city, for the university. He's a big Bengal guy, but I've never seen him do anything of substance in the city council. Doesn't mean he hasn't, but I sure haven't seen it. That does not mean he's not a nice guy. He is a nice guy. But Jim is a businessman. He's a realtor here in town. And what better place for a realtor to be than on city council? And you can draw your own conclusions on what that means. So do we need a cheerleader? We've got lots of those. Our mayor is one of the best cheerleaders in town. I'm not so sure about his managerial skills, but he's a great cheerleader. So Jim Johnston, well, there's no dirt to throw. I wouldn't throw any mud if there were, but I can't throw any flowers either. So Jim Johnston is running for seat number 1. His only competition is a fellow named Danny Wells. Danny Wells is an interesting fellow. Why are you interested in running for the office of City Council of Pocatello? Pocatello has long been my home. I care deeply for our community and want to help lead this wonderful city back to prosperity. Good statement. Though they mean well, the current council has allowed our city's finances to seriously deteriorate, increased taxes and fees to try and cover their mistakes, conducted the people's business behind closed doors, and allowed our mayor to misuse his authority. Pretty strong statement. Pocatello needs a city councilman who will make a common sense decisions and bring a forward-thinking perspective. Someone who will fight on behalf of every Pocatello citizen, not just political allies. Good point. And someone unafraid to hold our city leaders accountable for the use of our taxpayer dollars. I can and will be a dedicated representative for everyone in Pocatello. Interesting statement. That's Danny Wells. He's the only person running against Jim Johnston. Quite frankly, I looked a little deeper on Danny Wells, and although he had something to say, Jim has nothing to say, at least nothing I could see. I'm not quite sure if I will even cast a vote for seat number 1. I'm really that much up in the air. I don't see the city councilman there offering anything. I don't see the fellow that is running for the position necessarily saying anything there either. Let's move on to. Okay. By the way, I need to tell you, all of the candidates were offered an opportunity to answer those questions. Sierra Idaho Lorax Carta didn't. Wayne Skip Carter didn't. Kevin Perry didn't. Those were all seat number 2. Seat number 3, Roger Bray. He didn't originally answer the statement, but it did show up today. And it's an interesting statement. Anna Lynn Fraser. Let me just talk briefly about Anna Lynn Fraser. Anna Lynn Fraser, I'm sure, is a very nice lady. I don't think I've ever met her. I've been in Republican politics here in town for almost 10 years. I don't recall ever seeing her at a Republican function, ever. That doesn't mean she wasn't there, but I certainly don't recall. And when I was very active, I knew most of the people in the party. I don't recall ever seeing her there. She was late for the the Women Voters, League of Women Voters. Freudian slip there, forgive me. The night that they had that. And once she got there, she was still in her scrubs. She's a nurse. And according to a gratuitous article by the Journal staff in this last Sunday's newspaper, in the milestone section, usually where they talk about engagements and older people reaching their 85th birthday and all that, there was a very gratuitous editorial or article about Annalyn Fraser. She's obviously educated. Apparently she was a school teacher also. But she really didn't have anything to say at the women voters, the League of Women Voters meeting. And the reason for that is, I believe, that she is a placeholder for Evan Fraser. Evan Fraser, as you may know, and Evan Fraser is not one of those that there's no gray area with him. We either like or dislike him. Personally, I think he's a snake oil salesman, and those are his strong points. I have no use for the man. But I see this as a way for him to keep himself in political circles where he can exert some influence through Annalyn. And again, I do not mean in any way to cast any ill favor or light upon Miss Fraser. I don't know her. The picture shows a lovely woman who is well-educated, but she really had nothing to say at the meeting. And I suspect, and this is just because I have learned about the Republican politics here in town and how it works, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. I suspect that she is a placeholder for Evan, that within 6 months to a year she will find that her work is just too demanding and she needs more time for work and will have to step down, at which time Evan will be appointed to step into her position and resume his rightful role as a political pot stirrer for the community. So without saying anything, without meaning any ill intent toward her, I do not see her as a legitimate candidate. Doesn't mean she won't. She could get elected, because there are still some people in this community that believe Evan Fraser when he opens his mouth. I've learned that when he opens his mouth, when his lips are moving, he's usually lying. Nathan Millward, I don't know him. I saw him at the League of Women Voters meeting. What I've been able to determine about him is his major claim to fame is he's a union man. I have no problem with union men. I used to be a union representative myself, both on the police department and later in a different city. I do have very strong reservations about unions in the public domain for civil servants. I have very strong reservations on that. And I fear that Nathan Millward's major function will be to support Gary Moore, who never saw a union raise or benefit that he couldn't vote for, and Roger Bray, who is much the same way, contrary to what he says. Roger Bray portrays himself as a conservative on paper. He is anything but. You may remember Roger Bray was the water carrier, the chief architect, if you will, and the driving force behind the so-called non-discrimination ordinance. In other words, the special rights for homosexuals. So, and Roger Bray has been very supportive of the union. As a matter of fact, Millward, I think it was Millward and Bray were the only two that were invited to a union function recently. I had some paper here on it. I can't locate it at the moment. So for seat number 3, well, there's only one candidate that I can personally vouch for and say that that is a viable, legitimate candidate that has no baggage, has no agenda, has no personal dog in the fight other than to serve the public, and that would be Barbara Orr. And again, I would urge you to go to the city's website, read the statements by the candidates, contact Barbara Orr. She's got a website you can look up, and talk to her. She's very willing to talk. She is the only candidate that I see that's running for office this time that actually wants to do something worthwhile, and that's to serve you and me, the tax-paying public. Steve Brown, one of the most interesting on the city council. Interesting because he is, I can't even think of the words because I find him so detestable, and I say that very pointedly, that it's hard for me to be civil when I talk about the man. Steve Brown is a self-serving politician. I think he has delusions of grandeur because he's been able to get away with it as long as he has. But let's just let's read a little bit of in his statement. Steve Brown, the 4 questions for Steve Brown. I'm going to skip over the usual stuff on the top where he says, "I'm just your guy." Go to, in your opinion, what is the major issue facing Pocatello? And he loves to quote other people. In this case, he likes to quote Henry Clay. Now, when you see Steve Brown on the city council or in other settings, you don't see the real Steve Brown, the one with the juvenile temperament, who is very volatile. As well, I can remember a meeting that we were in when the Republican Party, when we were talking about Republican business candidates, I recall. Things didn't go his own way. He got so angry that he got up from his chair, picked up his chair, threw it across the room, and stormed out of the room. That is a typical Steve Brown thing. You won't see it, but many have. I'm not the only one. Or when we were having an executive meeting, And he was so angry because he didn't get his own way, and he literally got up from his chair and went to everybody sitting on the executive committee who had not supported what he wanted, and put his finger in their face and pointed to them and told them how they had stolen his party. Or the Steve Brown who used to brag about the fact that when he was the chairman for the Bannock County Republican Party, had never paid the dues to the state party. He was very proud of the fact that he, as chairman, had never paid the state dues that the Bannock County Republican Party was required to pay. They had never once paid those dues. He was very proud of that. What does that say about the character of a man who will put himself under the umbrella of an organization and then not support it, unless it's self-serving? This is the same Steve Brown that during the Republican caucus a few years ago, he and then party chairman, his name eludes me for the moment, perhaps it'll come back to me, and Evan Frazier and one other, I don't recall, showed up at the caucus. Now, you may recall that a few years ago the state passed a law that you must declare which party you belong to in order to affiliate with that party and to take part in their agenda. At the caucus, it turned out on the sheet of paper that came out from the city clerk's office that Brown, nor the then chairman, nor Frazier and someone else, none of them had declared. These were the party's leaders, and they had not declared their affiliation with the Republican Party and thought they were going to bogart their way into the caucus and run the show. My wife, God bless her, was one of those checking people off of the board in the books and saw that they had not declared and refused them entry until they declared. That was the day of the caucus, and these men who were running the party, Steve Brown, one of the architects of things that have happened, had not even declared themselves as Republicans, but had plans to run the party. There was one other point that I wanted to make about Steve Brown that goes to what I see as tremendous character flaws. Character flaws to the point where this man is self-serving and self-aggrandizing and has only one agenda, and that is Steve Brown. And the other part is Steve Brown is tied at the hip with Jim Johnston and Evan Frazier, the husband of Anna Lynn Frazier. And again, I say this because I don't want to cast any aspersion upon Anna Lynn Frazier. I don't know her. Never met the lady. I'm sure that she's a very nice lady. Her husband is a... Oh, and the other thing was, Steve Brown likes to talk about how he says, I have worked diligently to deliver civility in our local politics. Yeah, if you see the way he treated Idaho Lorax, I realize Idaho Lorax has some deficiencies, but the way he addressed him and basically called him, not basically, pointedly, called him a liar at the League of Women Voters, you'll see his degree of civility. He has a hard time controlling himself because he really does think he's the most clever fellow in the room, loves to make clever remarks whenever he can. Steve Brown, as you may recall, was the deciding vote that forced this city to put on the books the so-called non-discrimination ordinance. Bad law that you should never have gone through. He was the deciding vote. And you may remember, if you watched that, I was there when he did it, after a 6.5-hour marathon meeting, when it came time for him to be the tiebreaker, he went through his hand-wringing. He always likes to do the hand-wringing. And then he came up with a little homily about what his daddy once told him, and then he voted yes. So I'm sure that Steve Brown will have the homosexual community's vote. He will have the vote of several other people. Now, Steve Brown, as you may recall, was also appointed to the city council before he was then later elected. Steve Brown is the one who engineered for the Bannock County Republican Party. Remember, he was once the chairman, and he likes to be known as the big shot in the Republican Party. Well, he didn't like the way the so-called the conservative wing, I'm having trouble finding the word I want. He didn't like the way it was going because before the conservatives started getting really energetic within the party, there was no party. There was Steve Brown and his buddies who ran the party, and it was their party. He didn't like that, so he engineered by calling in many of his friends who somehow had been elected to office, but never showed up for any meetings. But when they called, they came, and he was the one who made it so that the The quorum required 50% of the precinct's committeemen plus one. That made it impossible to have a quorum, and for over a year now, the Bannock County Republican Party has not been able to legally do business as the Republican Party because Steve Brown didn't like the idea that the conservatives in the party were gaining traction. So he managed to sabotage that. He is a man of, well, he's an interesting character, but he's certainly not the kind of person I can endorse in any way, shape, or form for any political office. And again, as I tell you, he's tied at the hip with Evan Frazier. He and Evan Frazier are the two, and I have the photographs that I can show this. He and Evan Frazier were the two fellows that were spying, if you will, on the conservative part of the Republican Party, who were having tutorials in how you do politics, you know, how to get people elected, how to work your precinct and do things that are part of the party. Well, they didn't like the fact that there was a large group of conservatives within the party. So they staked themselves out across from where the meeting was being held and sat there with a camera taking pictures of people one night as they were coming and going from the meeting. What they intended to do with those pictures is anyone's guess. The fact that they felt so strongly as to do something like this is reprehensible at best. And these are people who purport to be solid members of the Republican Party, or for that matter, of the community. All right. Roger Bray, in the 8 years he was on the City Council before, was not able to in any way, shape, or form, get done those things that he says he wants to do this time. So why would we elect him back into the office that he says, I've got this agenda, you can go read it, and he wasn't able to fulfill it in the last 8 years, so why should we think that he'll fulfill it in the next 4? We don't. Roger Bray is, for lack of a better term, a political hack who needs power and needs the prestige of office to carry on for his personal needs. Well, we've run out of time. My goodness, there's so much to talk about. I wish we had more time. In the meantime, exercise your right to vote. It is a privilege. It's a responsibility. Very few people in the world can really do it in freedom like we do. Remember to vote for those people who represent you. In the meantime, God bless you and yours. Remember to vote for our nation, vote for the state of Israel, and hopefully we'll see you Wednesday night at 8:30, Sunday at noon. God bless you. See you next time.